You're listening to Kitchen Table Finance. Join Dave Shotwell and Nick Nauta as they cut through the complexity of financial planning and serve bites of investment advice that are both personal and practical.
Hey Dave, how you doing today?
Not bad, Nick. How are you?
I am doing well, sir.
Good.
It's Friday. Looks like we got a moment
Indeed.
of sunshine here, so let's enjoy that.
I can't remember the last time I saw the sun.
Then we'll get on with our regularly scheduled program.
Yeah, enjoy it.
So, interesting topic today. It's been floating around quite a bit just in general terms, but wanted to kind of drill down a little bit, get some thoughts on how it might affect portfolios in the market, and that is the all-encompassing artificial intelligence. How is that going to disrupt our world, Mr. Shotwell?
I have gotten the question, some form of the isn't AI scary from so many different sources in the last 6 months, maybe a year at this point. Mm-hmm. And, it's an interesting thing because I've never, in my lifetime, I don't remember any technology that kind of set people on edge quite so much.
Right.
I
mean, the only thing that I can think of is when the internet started coming around, but people had no clue what it was or what it would do. So it wasn't like scary. It was just this big unknown, right? Nobody knew how it would change the world.
And it's funny. It's like I have kind of a cynical view of that, social media and some of the things have changed the world for the worse. Right. But I don't like when the internet was new, it was all about, hey, you can type something in here and come up with information you never thought of. And, it was mostly positive. There was the talk of e-commerce, putting Main Street out of business, those kind of things. But those kind of came along a little later after the technology had been around a little bit, is my perception,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Back on it. So yeah, but AI just kind of, I think for some good reasons in some ways, I'm not dismissing, some of the concerns around it. It definitely raises questions, right? Around like, what does it mean to be an artist? What does it mean to be human?
Right.
Because it is it's just a little weird, a little eerie, some of the things that it's capable of doing that imitate human behavior so closely.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing a lot of it. We're seeing a lot of it in the headlines because it is a change, right? And any change, there's always going to be like pushback the world's going to HE double hockey sticks and a handbasket, right?
This is a rated PG show, so
there's always a bunch of people out there with that. And I guess the biggest one that I've seen, or what people are worried about, is AI going to replace me, right? Are we not going to need financial advisors anymore because we can just go to ChatGPT and ask it what we want, and then we'll have the solution,
right?
Which is somewhat interesting to me because a lot of that information is already out there. And people already know a lot of it, but they just can't seem to follow it or don't feel confident enough in doing it themselves. And I don't know that that's changing because it's easier to get access to that information.
Right. Yeah. When you put it that way, like in terms of your job and my job, it's no different than Google, really. I mean, you can ask GPT if you should do a raw conversion, or you can Google it. But, it's maybe a little more efficient way of getting that information, and not necessarily like a sea change. And,
well, and we, and not to, this definitely isn't a podcast about how it's going to change our industry, but we think of it in terms of like, it will more than likely make us more efficient so we can help more people. And that, is probably a good thing. And that probably translates to a lot of people out there as far as like the job losses go. It's going, going to change things for sure, but probably in terms of making people more efficient, because they don't have to do some of that manual stuff that artificial intelligence can do for them when it comes to like sourcing information or compiling information, things like that, or computer tasks that you can have the system do instead of you having to do the steps of the process, right?
Right. And so, while history is never a perfect guide in these situations, it does offer, I think, some ways to think about AI in context. Technology and the markets and the economy have always run in what I've heard some people call hype cycles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, .com, we had the .com bubble, we had blockchain, a couple of years ago, self-driving cars. They capture people's attention and they get people real excited about investment opportunities and disruption to the economy. And, each one kind of promises big change, but, economist Roy Amara wrote once that, people tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short run while they underestimate its effect in the long run. Right. So, if you think about like how the internet changed how we do work, like it's not just it's so much part of how we do everything now that we don't even think about it. Right. And I don't, when people were first dreaming up how the internet was going to change the world, I don't think they dreamed that like a financial planner's entire job would basically be like everything we do is interfacing through the internet.
Mm-hmm.
We interface with our custodians, we interface with our clients, we interface with our teammates. Everything requires being on the internet. It's not just, hey, I'm going to pull out the internet for this tool, for this thing that I do for my job. It is the job. And I remember probably in the late 70s, I was pretty young, but my uncle was a managing partner at a law firm in Michigan. And he was talking about that he was going to be buying computers to sit on the desks of every attorney in his office, and how some of his partners just thought he was crazy, but he was so sure that was going to be, going to just change their world. And, at that time, I think it was probably right around 1980, the idea that it was going to be not just part of everyone's job, but the job for most knowledge workers just was foreign.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you don't believe, how important the internet is, show up to the office one day when the power's out or the internet's
right. Or just Comcast is having issues, right? You might as well go home. Yeah. So, investors often get carried away with the promises of these new untested tech, because it's really hard to wrap your head around, like, what does it really mean and how is it going to play out in the economy? And, so think about that, back to my uncle and whatever company he probably bought computers from back in 1980 probably didn't exist after 1984, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't know which one it was, but if you think about all the different computer companies that were out there trying to, get space on people's desks at the time, 99% of those people of new generations would never even heard of.
Yeah.
Because they either failed or they were merged into other companies. And so, trying to figure out like how to invest in artificial intelligence right now would be no different than like trying to pick Apple and Microsoft out of the like hundreds of guys trying to start computer companies in California in their garages in 1977,
Yeah.
And
it's somewhat interesting when you think of it in terms of like when you're buying a stock, you're not buying it for like what's the value today, it's what the value is going to be in the future, right? So like I think of a company like Tesla, which is one of the largest, if not the largest in terms of value, but like profit wise, especially last quarter, not real good, right?
Yeah.
And it's this concept of, everybody gets super excited about the idea of electric cars. which, may very well be the thing that, we see all over the place at some point in the future. But, I don't know as though Tesla is going to be the one that's the majority of cars on the road, right? It's really hard to kind of figure that part out.
Right. And so, kind of the way, like a good way to think about AI and the markets and the economy is not to try to pick winners and losers. It's just to recognize that AI is probably going to affect positively in terms of productivity. In terms of productivity, going to have a positive effect on the whole economy at some point. It's going to allow growth that wouldn't otherwise be there. And it probably, in that regard, you just want to be a diversified investor in the American economy rather than trying to pick the winners and losers out of the AI companies trying to make it, because it's going to help Procter and Gamble. It's going to help Ford. It's going to help, all the different parts of the economy, not necessarily all equally, sure, but it basically just frees up capacity.
Yep.
And, also too, I think that kind of speaks to the fears people have around AI.
Mm-hmm.
If it weren't for productivity increases, doing more with less, the economy would stagnate. That's what, when we look at how our standard of living has improved over the last, pick your starting point, however many years, it's all about the productivity increases we've seen since the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Basically growth is about being able to do more with, do more work with less labor and more with machines.
Which is more and more important, and especially as it relates to the U.S. economy, because we have less and less people entering the labor force, right?
Right. Yeah.
When people are having less and less kids, which means there's less and less people to do the work, which means we need an increase in productivity or we're going to be in trouble.
Right. And, it basically frees up American just workers in general, to do the things that machines can't do.
Right.
The things you can't teach a machine to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to keep coming back to our profession, but there's things about knowing what works for someone that just doesn't boil down to a mathematical equation. Right.
Right. Absolutely.
And it's not just, fitting somebody to an algorithm necessarily. So if it means that you and I don't have to spend as much time doing things that can be replaced by an automated spreadsheet computer system, then we get to do more of the creative, useful stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I've said this several times on this podcast. It's at this point they're probably going to print it on my tombstone, but if we just leave it to the math, right? We'd all be living in cardboard boxes with $1 million investment accounts. Well, the computer's going to do the math, so don't be surprised when the answer is, hey, spend nothing, save and invest everything. Good luck out there, right?
Sounds like something out of a Bradbury novel.
So that's like the hard part where advisors come in and helping you figure out like what makes actual practical sense. What's the give and take between enjoying today and being able to enjoy tomorrow. Some of those things for sure that computers aren't going to be able to do as it relates to our industry. And I'm sure in every industry you can think of those different things. And
the economist Joseph Schumpeter called it, he talked about technology as creative destruction. And yes, AI is going to disrupt certain methods and certain ideas and certain businesses, which, that creates fear and creates resistance to change. But at the same time, it's going to also give rise to new industries and benefit workers that are willing and able to learn that new tech and, offer new products to consumers. So while it's destroying on the one hand, it's creating on the other. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? You know, there's the old economics textbook study of, the buggy whip makers in like 1905,
Yeah.
1910. You wouldn't want to be a buggy whip manufacturer as Henry Ford was gearing up, right?
Right.
But if you were in the tire business, or you might have been making certain components for uh, wagons and such that were easily adapted to cars, and all of a sudden, you had a huge market.
Mm-hmm.
It's different jobs, not necessarily fewer jobs.
Yeah, and it's going to, like you said, it's going to affect people disproportionately, right? There's certain industries, there's certain jobs out there that probably won't exist in the future because of this, but it's going to create other jobs and opportunities. So you got to, think through some of how that works, as we relate back to, financial planning and where you're sitting, you got to think through of what the threats are to where you're currently working and what different things that you need to do to maybe, if you're in one of those positions, to figure out what the next, wave is, where the technology is going, what does that mean for your job, and how do you prepare for that, right?
Right. And, in terms of the economy, like you said, demographically, we could use, a boost. And just because there's fewer young workers following older workers into the workplace. So we need something to help fill that gap or take some of that pressure off. And at last, statistically, the last thing I saw was that since like 1948, the average of productivity growth every year has been a little over 2%. But for the last few years, it's been around 1.5%. So we're actually seeing productivity growth decline. And so we would hope to see that technologies like this get that back on trend at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, and of course we haven't even started to tackle any of the philosophical questions around AI,
Right.
and I don't think I'm equipped to do that.
I think that's a different podcast with a couple different hosts. I'm sure they're out there. I don't know what they are. But
I could give it a try, but I don't think it'd be doing anybody any services. So the big thing, I think the big takeaway as investors and as financial planners is don't get caught up in like looking for the AI winners or the AI losers. Instead, think about what it means for the macroeconomy and productivity growth being what drives, the stock market and everything else forward.
Yeah, and I think too on the other side, not portfolio wise, but change is coming, change is inevitable. So yes, this is going to change the way that the world works. It's not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but don't just expect it not to happen, right?
Right. Well, even if you wanted it not to happen, there's nothing. Even if a lot of people wanted it not to happen, it doesn't stop technological change.
Yeah,
You just can't.
Snake's already out of the bag, so there's no reeling it back in at this point, right?
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, Mr. Shotwell, I appreciate your time today. It was fun.
Thank you,
as
Nick.
always. If
You
our
bet.
listeners have any questions or any AI examples, would love to hear them. Shoot us an email at info@srbadvisors.com. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Nick.
This is a Zedia Media production.